Hello, everyone. Business Guru here. So, I promised I would go back and talk. I talked about why to become an entrepreneur, but now what I want to talk about are the stages that I've had as an entrepreneur and what I've gone through. And there are a number of them. I think just thinking out loud here, um, I don't have a preconceived number in my head of how many stages there are, but I'll just walk you through my history since I started the business, and then we'll circle back and we'll see how many stages there are. So, the very first stage, when you make the decision to become an entrepreneur, I call this the elation stage. At this stage, you've quit your job, you have your savings in the bank, and all the capital that you've raised to start the business. So, you got a big fat bank account, you got lots of money. You've got your freedom. You're not working anymore for anybody else. And everything just seems incredibly rosy. You know, there's lightness in your step. You're smelling the flowers. You're out enjoying life. You're gradually setting up your business because you've allotted in your mind a timeline to get your business set up that you think you don't have any pressure on you to make sales because you understand it takes time and nobody expects a business to make sales right from day one. So most entrepreneurs are very, very happy during this period because all of their work is on setting up their business. And they're not worried at this point about a lack of sales, or about the money that's disappearing from their bank account because there's enough of it there that they don't really notice it dwindling away from day to day. They just feel confident and happy in their work, as they go about their day. I certainly felt that way for, I would say about 2 or 3 or 4 months. I'm just thinking, I started the business on July 1st, and I was still raising money in late August, early September. Um, and I was still very much in the elation stage, I would say, well into September, October from July. So about 4 or 5, 6 months, um, I was walking on cloud nine, and I was feeling really great about everything. And I started a blog at that point, and a lifestyle blog, and I was cooking dinner, from scratch every day, and I was trying new recipes, and I was posting information about the recipes online and telling people just basically how wonderful entrepreneurship was. Um, and that stage has a limited shelf life because what starts to happen eventually is you start to notice the hole in your bank account. You start to notice, the fact that your money is draining away. It's a little bit like when you skydive and you jump out of a plane and you see people skydiving. When they first jump out of the plane, it looks like they're flying. It doesn't look like they're falling. And it's not until you get to within sight of the ground that you start to actually feel and realize that you're falling at an unbelievable speed and that you're not actually flying. Well, it's a lot like that in business. You start noticing that you see the money draining out of your bank account. You see a point in the future where you're not going to have any, and you start to panic because you realize, oh, jet, I've actually got to start making some sales. Um, and this is really where the rubber hits the road. This is the end of that stage, and you get into the oh my God stage and the watch pot never boils stage. So at this stage, your focus shifts towards trying to follow a routine that's you think is going to lead to you making, lasting sales. And in my case, I mean, it's going to differ with each business, but in my case, it was putting listings up on eBay and watching some of them sell and watching most of them just sit. But getting enough sales that I had believed that the core activity that I needed to be doing was sitting at the dining table just listing and scanning items one after another, and not really paying a whole lot of attention to anything else. And you know, your routine is going to differ depending on what kind of business you're in, or what you think is going to bring in traffic. But what you're going to find very quickly when you're in that stage, at a very early stage, is that getting traffic is actually really, really difficult. Getting people to notice you and to do business with you is very difficult. And that stage, I mean, the oh my God stage really is sort of the second stage, and it's very short-lived. It's probably a month or 2 months, and it leads into the third stage, which is the watch pot never boils stage. So at this point, you are hungry for customers, and you are hungry for business. And because you're hungry for business and you don't have a sustainable business model yet, and you're not making money in a sustainable way, you're willing to do almost anything to get that business. But you're also hyper aware of when you make the effort and you don't get the payback. And you become very resentful and very upset often at the lack of return. And it can be very, very difficult to view this subjectively and to not take it personally. This is the stage where a lot of people who knew you in your industry but didn't know you in a business sense are going to commend you on having started your business, but they are not going to actually give you any kind of meaningful support in your business. And that's going to drive you crazy. And it's going to feel very personal, and it's going to feel very spiteful. And it's deep, very, very, very important, very critical that you learn to manage your emotions, you learn to regulate, you have an outlet with which to vent your frustrations, but you don't vent them on the people that are behaving this way with you. And the reason being because it's not personal. Most of these people mean absolutely no harm, and they're being completely innocent. It's just that they don't see you the same way that you see yourself. So as an example of this in my field, I mean, I've been involved in stamps for over 45 years. In the trade, I first worked at Weta Stamps in Vancouver in 1989 and 1990. So there's a significant group of people who know me from my Weta days and who are familiar with my name and have interacted with me and have bought and sold with me when I worked for Weta. And they know that I'm a stamp guy, and they know that I'm knowledgeable. But what their perception of me during that time, up to the point where I started my business, was as either as a collector or as a collector who worked for somebody else who had a business. Yes, they might perceive me as being knowledgeable, but they don't see me as an expert, and they don't see me as a big name, certainly in the Canadian stamp world. And so, you know, it meant that when I started my business, I had many people from this area commending me on starting, and saying that it was valuable what I was doing, but they weren't ordering any stamps from me. They weren't going to my website. They weren't participating in my auction when I started it. They weren't buying anything from my retail store. And it felt deeply personal, like they just didn't care, and they were just happy to give all their business and all their support to my competitors. And it was a very difficult thing to accept, because it felt very unsupportive. Oh, this is my cat, Ernie, who's just woken up from his nap and is looking for some attention. So it felt very, very personal. But it really wasn't. What it was that these people They simply didn't perceive me yet as being on a par with my competitors, even though I knew that my actual level of stamp and philatelic knowledge in many cases actually outstrips most of the people I was competing with. They didn't see it that way because they didn't know what I knew about myself. And what they're looking for and what attracts a customer to become a customer is stability and reliability. And that in turn is earned by being around for a long period of time. So most of these collectors would come to respect me as they see that my business is not an overnight thing. It's not a fly by night operation. It's not here one day, gone the next. It's been a consistent fixture within the philatelic community. And the longer you're in that position where you are noticeable, and the more you're doing more or less the same thing with small refinements, the more trust they're prepared to place in you, and the more business they'll do with you. So it's very, very important when you're interacting with these people not to alienate them, not to get angry with them, not to take out your frustration at not having support from them. Because in most cases, eventually, if you can see your way through and you can stay in business, you will get it eventually. But you have to be patient, and you have to avoid taking your frustrations out and taking it personally. That for me was probably one of the hardest things that I had to deal with. It was one of my biggest areas of frustration, and it was, regulating that as a person who's autistic was extremely difficult. But I prevailed and I did it. So that stage lasted, I would say, it's hard for me to put an exact date on it, but certainly for the first 2 or 3 years that I was running my business, I would say that's how things were. There was a lot of people I wanted to do business with that I wasn't getting business from. Now, what eventually happens as you follow your routines and you build your value proposition is that you get your first regular customers. And it's barely noticeable at first. You'll get one order, you'll get one person who comes and does business with you, who's not a family member, they're not a friend, so they're not sort of a false customer, but they're objective. And here, I'm just going to let this play out. Just one sec here. There we go. Sorry about that. That was Ernie, and he needed to get out, and he was gonna disrupt me here if I didn't let him out of the office. So you're going to get that first customer that tries you out and comes back and repeats. And when sometimes you'll get immediate feedback from that person, and they will express a general belief or a general faith in what it is you're doing. They'll tell you they like the service, or there's something they like about what you're doing. And in some instances, you'll be able to start engaging and dialoguing with them right away and getting some insight from them about what it is that they like and what they don't like. And if you do more of what they've said they like, what you'll start to notice is you'll get other customers, sometimes referred by that person, sometimes not. Initially, it will not be enough to pay the bills. It'll not be enough to keep you fed. You're still going to find that you're incurring debt and you're borrowing to make up the shortfalls. But you'll start to feel like you're getting some traction and you're getting some permanent group of customers who are following you. And that will grow as you continue to do it. For me, I would say there were a couple of stages when I was on eBay, because I have to make a distinction now between um, my eBay days where I started my business and my current website, brixtonchrome.com, where I migrated to when it became apparent to me that eBay was untenable. So this sort of is a different trajectory from what a lot of you will experience if you do everything right the first time. You may go through some of these stages more than once if you have to pivot. But on eBay, what did start to happen was I did develop a core group of customers that I did regular business with, and I did grow that customer base. And there did get to be a point where I didn't worry too much about whether or not I was going to get customers. There'll come a point where you're adding customers frequently enough that, and you're not losing too many customers, that you start to develop some faith that if you stick with this, you're going to keep getting customers and you're going to keep growing. And that eventually you'll make enough money um, to cover the cost of what you're doing. And then some, and to make more money than that. And that for me lasted on eBay for probably about 2 or 3 years. Then what I started to notice, at least on eBay, was that I could not raise my sales above a certain amount per month. And I'll get into that in a separate video where I talk about online platforms and double-sided markets. But it became apparent to me that eBay was not going to be a long-term solution to grow the business and that I had to leave. And because of the restrictions that eBay placed on my ability to communicate with people and the brand loyalty that most of my customers had to eBay, I wound up having to start the business more or less over again when I decided to go out and start my Shopify website. And I was forced to go through, stages 1 to 3 all over again, and stage 4, which is the stage where you're building your regular customers. And so what I did in order to cement my customer base was I decided to, instead of advertising and spending a lot of money trying to attract people to the website, what I did after a period where I had spent money advertising and it just simply didn't yield any results, I decided to start a weekly auction and to pivot away from retail sales. Now, this was a big deal because when I started the business, I started out as a retailer. And I had to completely pivot and go into auctions, which was not what I originally wanted to do, because I knew how much work was going to be involved in running a weekly auction. But I did pivot away, and I decided to start an auction at $1 per item, no reserves, and I lost a lot of money on the first 10 weeks that I did the auctions. But by doing that, I gained an entire core group of customers who came back, who wanted to see the next deals that were going to come along each week. And that base grew and became what it is now. So that sort of leads you into stage 4, stage 5, where you start, in addition to getting your regular customers, you begin to refine the actual business model itself to a point where your business is making money independent of the amount of debt that it's carrying. So in other words, it may be weighted down and it may still be losing money because of the amount of interest and debt service payments that are being made to cover off debts that you've built up or taken out to grow the business. But you'll reach a point after 5 or 6 or 7 years where your business is making enough money on a go-forward basis that if you didn't have the debts and you were able to inject cash back into the business, that you would be able to grow and scale it, and you are confident that you could grow and scale your business. And so that leads you to stage 6, which is another frustration stage again, where you are successful as a business owner and you know you would be able to do better, but you don't have the capital to be able to expand. And so, your next stage becomes trying to raise that capital and access it. And when you're successful with that, you're now ready to expand and scale the business. And so that's stage 8, and that's the stage that I'm at now. And I anticipate going forward from here, the next stage would be just continual scaling of the business and the continuation of the business as a full going concern. So that's my outline of the stages of entrepreneurship up to this point for me. Thank you for watching, and hang in there.